So some other camp whispers and intel. Start at Notre Dame. Jack Coan is indeed your starting quarterback. Now, this was about as shocking as cold weather in International Falls, Minnesota in December, but nevertheless, Brian Kelly makes it known Jack Coan is the starter. So what happened? Well, of course, immediately what happened is he got questioned. Now, I want you to keep in mind, a lot of the people who are questioning Brian Kelly, he has a coaching career longer than they've been alive. And he made the decision after 1.5 weeks of camp. I want everyone to understand what we're talking about here. You got a guy who specializes in offense and quarterback development and evaluation, who saw fit after 1.5 weeks of camp to make the decision. What that means is it wasn't particularly close. So I get someone in my inbox yesterday, paraphrasing. Why would he not go with the younger choice? He'd have the same record, but he'd have better potential upside. I have no clue how to even respond to that. So I didn't. I just moved on. He'd have the same record. This is a Notre Dame team that has a stretch in their season this year where they play 6 teams out of a 7-game stretch coming off bye weeks. A lot of those point spreads are going to be single digit. A lot of this team's season is going to hinge on one possession, one way or the other. You're high. You're high if you think that you can plug and play quarterbacks here and you'd get the same record either way. Again, it's pure Xbox mentality. It's just pure fantasy. It's in another universe. Brian Kelly made the right call. He made the only call. Jack Coan's going to be the guy, and they're going to be a very good team this year. Like I just said, even with Jack Coan, it's going to be razor-thin margin for error. It's going to be one possession here or there. They're going to have to grind out games, and hopefully, those younger quarterbacks, Tyler Buckner is a guy who everyone's excited about. I was talking to an evaluator this week who said, I'm still not even sure about Tyler Buckner. I know what the upside is, but I'm not so sure that we got a full chance to evaluate the kid coming out of high school because he didn't play his senior year. And so, point is, remains to be seen, but for the here and now, because that's what the coaching staff coaches for, the here and now, it's Jack Coan's job. Luke Doty at South Carolina looked like we had terrible news Saturday. I mean, it looked like Luke Doty was out for the year. And it turns out that he's not out for the year. He's just out for an extended period of time. The initial fear was he had broken his foot. Someone stepped on him, I think, in the Friday practice. And so the initial fear was he just fractured it, he had broken it. So then Shane Beamer steps to the podium more recently and says, nope, thank the good Lord above, it is not something that's going to keep him out the whole year. It's only a sprain, and we actually think we could get him back for week 1. Now, Luke Doty's questionable right now, but that's huge news for them because they had already had terrible news with the defensive back transferring out. And so they're already going to have to score a ton of points to keep up in some of these games. Much harder to do that when your projected starting quarterback is down and out with a foot injury. At Oklahoma, I want to spend a couple of minutes on this. I remember on National Signing Day, we were at this desk, and Steve Wiltfong and I were talking about the elite depth. That's the key to Oklahoma's surge in many people's minds, mine included. As a legitimate national championship contender, it's the depth. And they've got elite depth, not just on offense. They got it on defense, too. 3 names that I want you to pay attention to right now. Perfect case study on the depth that they're building. Name number 1, Clayton Smith. Talked about him a lot on National Signing Day. 6'4", 220-pound true freshman. This is the kind of guy who has an incredible skill set. Now, he is relatively raw compared to some of the other more veteran guys they have on that roster. But my point is, there was a time not too long ago where this guy would come in and start on talent alone because Oklahoma wouldn't have the defensive depth to keep him off the field. They would have had to have played him. Clayton Smith is currently running, 3rd? And the question currently with him is, I wonder if the light will flip on this year. If it doesn't, that's fine. We'll put him in some blowout games and we'll get him some reps, but they don't need him this year. It would be nice to have him. They don't need him to step up and play an integral role to their Big 12 title hopes and college football playoff hopes. Name number 2, Ethan Downs. Same deal here. 6'4", 240, true freshman, having a great camp, very much pushing for a backup job behind Isaiah Thomas. But notice what I just said again. Pushing for a backup job. This Ethan Downs, Clayton Smith for that matter, 5-6 years ago, they're starting. No question in my mind, they are being pressed into starting duty for Oklahoma. And now you got Clayton Smith holding down a 3 spot with room to move up, and you got Ethan Downs fighting with Reggie Grimes for that backup spot behind Isaiah Thomas. But the one to pay most attention to, that you probably will because it's quarterback, Caleb Williams is having a phenomenal camp for them. This was our number 1 quarterback in this last recruiting cycle. He has done nothing to disappoint. He's come into a program where the preseason Heisman Trophy favorite resides at the QB1 position, and he has made a ton of noise. Not to push for the starting job, per se, but he's having the kind of camp that if he walked in and Spencer Rattler didn't exist, you as an Oklahoma fan would end up saying, I feel totally comfortable with Caleb Williams. I know he's a true freshman. I know he's never started a game, but coaching staff feels good about him. Locker room feels good about him. He's a grinder. He's a worker. He's totally wired the right way mentally. He's got all the physical tools, good decision maker, going to only improve over time. I feel good about him. That's the kind of guy you're going to have on your bench this year. But also, as we have learned, having a good backup quarterback, you have no clue what's going to happen this year. You have no clue if Spencer Rattler is going to be all that we hope he is, but even if he is, you don't know what in the world the injury bug's going to deal with you. But Oklahoma is one of, off the top of my head, not knowing what Ohio State's quarterback depth chart is going to end up looking like, this is one of very few teams this year that could afford to have a quarterback miss a series or miss a quarter or miss a half or a game and possibly roll merrily along. You're looking at Oklahoma's schedule right now. It's an interesting draw they have, because on one hand you're going to say, oh, they should win every game, but at the same time they got a trip to Kansas State. They're looking to avoid going 0 for 3 the last 3 years against them. Right before they play Texas, right after that they got TCU, which is not going to be an easy out, and that's a team who can put some points up on you. So I'm saying the reason why I believe in Oklahoma is because Oklahoma has built some depth now that you've not seen them have before. I know some of you are in the I got to see it before I believe it camp, which there's no skill in doing, by the way, but you have at it. You live your life. I am a believer before I have seen it. And by it, I mean high-level defensive play from Oklahoma. Up the road a bit, in Iowa, where my people reside, specifically Ames, we have spoken about this once before. This is going to be a preseason top 10 team at Iowa State. I'll ask you again. Do we believe there is an area or multiple areas on this team that they are capable of significantly upgrading? Because Michael Swain over there the other day, he works for our Iowa State site with 24/7 Sports. He found one. I think it's a solid one, too. If you remember watching the Big 12 championship game, Iowa State loses 27-21. Had bad turnover. I'm not going to call it luck. It's execution on Oklahoma's part. But they were minus 2 or 3 turnovers. But one of the hidden yardage factors that really set them up for a loss, along with the turnovers, was they gave up a couple of big kickoff returns, 86 combined yards against Oklahoma. They gave up one against Kansas. No one really cared about that. But it cost them. And it's been a massive point of emphasis for that coaching staff, which you can afford to do when your whole team returns. You're not installing a whole bunch of new stuff. They have placed a premium, on kick return covers. They can't kick touchbacks. They got to figure out something. And that's what they've invested a lot of time in. Now, that may sound like the most boring practice intel report that you've ever had. It could mean the difference in 2 games this year. They went 9-3 last year. They weren't 12-1. They went 9-3. They lost 3 games. One was a conference championship game, but they lost 3 games. Could literally be the difference in whether they're on the fringes of playoff contention, and just a nice little story that could lock down another New Year's Six Bowl. And lastly, the Auburn Tigers had a scrimmage yesterday. Now, there's a lot new going on at Auburn, obviously. Brian Harson's in there from Boise State. His staff's in there. And he's got a kind of eclectic mixture of some foreigners to the SEC and some natives to the SEC. But they're trying to have this offense, in a lot of cases, completely reprogrammed. They're doing something way different than Gus Malzahn did. All the while, they're trying to win 8 or 9 games this year. So defense is where it needs to be. That was my biggest takeaway from reading and talking to people close to Auburn. Derek Mason's got a defense they can win with. That may sound like it's an every-year deal for Auburn. You can't take that stuff for granted, especially with the kind of players they've lost the last 2 years. You can't take that for granted. But everyone wants to know about quarterback. Bo Nix was Bo Nix yesterday. And by that, I don't mean it pejoratively necessarily. I just mean he had some good and some bad. Had some wow plays, turned the ball over multiple times. Now, unlike a lot of people who I've already seen draw the conclusion here, I know this is going to sound very mundane and very War Eagle-ish. I'm going to hold off for the time being making a definitive conclusion on what I think Bo Nix is going to be under this new coaching staff. Just all I ask of you is let me wait one more scrimmage, or maybe even 1 or 2 games into the season. Akron and Alabama State give you the ability to do that. I'm going to wait a little while longer before I make any kind of definitive call on where Bo Nix is going to be as a quarterback under this new regime.